morning, good afternoon, good evening, and even good night for all of you out there who are, let's say, joining us for day 2 and round 3 on the Pivot 2020 week of where we convene oil and gas and geothermal to create that synergy together. The topic of today is how to fund and get funding for your geothermal venture. I'm going to be your moderator of this world-class panel. My name is Marit Brommer. I am the Executive Director of the IGA, and it is an absolute privilege to have 6 world-class people with me today on this virtual roundtable. We see opportunity, and there is difficulty indeed under these stringent and very extreme circumstances. What I've learned from my American friends one day is that we should never waste a good crisis. And I'm sure that we all agree that we are facing, in a certain direction and in a certain perspective, a very large and deep-rooted crisis that goes even beyond COVID-19. But the recent downturn has really impacted thousands of highly skilled workers in the oil and gas industry. But the disruption has also caused a wave of innovation and innovative energy, and hence that entrepreneurial spirit that we aim to seek out. This panel, together with me, will explore how oil and gas workers can leverage their core competencies to launch a geothermal venture, what investors are looking for when it comes down to building that startup, but also how to incubate it. And we will look for mentors and mentorships and entrepreneurs in the oil patch. We'll even talk about a prize, a geothermal prize, who would have thought that? And ultimately, it's about creating bankable projects. It is a pleasure to introduce to you 6 panelists. We did have a few changes last minute due to illnesses. As you can see, the lady for me at least, on the right-hand side, Emily Reichert, unfortunately could not make it. And Sean Pors is replaced by Lauren Boyd. It is my pleasure to start with Bob Metcalf, professor at the University of Texas at Austin. Bob, I would like to ask you to start with a very short introduction, who you are, your interest in geothermal, and of course, understanding the financial background of launching a geothermal venture.
Hello, I'm Bob Metcalf. I'm professor of innovation at the University of Texas. And I assume you're all here because you're interested in the geothermal startup ecosystem and how we're going to fund it. I want to warn you that for the last 50 years, I've been working on another startup ecosystem called the internet. The thing that is carrying these images at this very moment is, so I've been working on it for 50 years. So you need to be careful because if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So to me, the geothermal startup ecosystem looks like the internet. The idea that the oil and gas industry has a lot to offer the geothermal ecosystem is the same as in the internet. Some startups make the mistake of viewing the incumbents as competition, and I think that's certainly true from time to time, but it's not the best model. The best, most successful startups in the internet ecosystem partnered early with the incumbents, and the early internet was carried by the predecessor companies. And who will be funding the startups to come? And I view it not as a 1 year or even a 5 or a 10 year. We're going to be funding startups for the next 10 or 20 or 30 or maybe even 50 years in geothermal, deep geothermal. Well, where will that funding come from? Will it come from the existing geothermal venture community? Will it come from the internet people coming over into geothermal? Will it come from the oil and gas investors or oil and gas companies? Will it come from the government? And the answer is all of those, of course, will be contributing to the funding of the various phases of geothermal companies. The very earliest stages of funding come from the 4 Fs: the founder, her family, their friends, and other fools are the early investors in startups, but then come the angels and the venture capitalists and so on. And let me close with one mistake that I believe I participated in the green tech bubble in Boston some years ago, where the fate of that bubble was sealed by its name. The proponents decided to call it the green tech or clean tech evolution, and they missed the opportunity to solve energy. That is, had that been, I claim that had that been positioned as solving energy as opposed to solving green, it might have been more effective, because having cheap energy is a much more powerful motivator than clean. So in my list of attributes of deep geothermal, I would put it cheap and clean and abundant and ubiquitous and safe. I hope was that more than 2 minutes? I don't know. Next.
Well, this is perfect, Bob. It very nicely set the scene. So thank you very much for that fantastic introduction. So Alexander Helling, I will now turn to you. You are the CEO of Baseload Capital, and please introduce yourself to the crowd, who I'm sure is looking forward to that.
Thank you very much, Martin. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, my background is in project finance. So a couple of years ago, if someone told me that I would be working building geothermal power plants, then I probably didn't even know what that was at that time. But a couple of years ago, I moved from the Swedish ECA, the Export Credit Agency, where I was working with project finance, into a technology company called Climon, where I started as head of finance. And it was quite interesting when we, on the trip to Iceland about 4 or 5 years ago, when we realized that new technology, which is scalable and with the proper funding structure, you could really disrupt the full geothermal industry, not looking at single risk projects. So then we started Baseload Capital about 3 years ago, and Baseload Capital invests and develops geothermal heat power projects, and we want to do it on a global scale. And there's a huge opportunity, especially when you look at low and medium temperature geothermal power projects. So we started Baseload together with 4 family offices in Sweden to tap into this huge opportunity. And only after 6 months, we also received a quite big investment from a US fund called Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is quite interesting because they have one single investment criteria, and that is that you as a company should over a lifetime have the possibility to reduce greenhouse gases with 0.5 gigaton, which basically means that they were evaluating if we could then deploy 100 gigawatts of geothermal heat power, and came up that with the processes that we have, with the funding structure that we have in place, that should be possible. And so we brought them on back in 2018, and then we have set up companies in Iceland, Japan, Taiwan, and also in the US. So our first power plant we managed to put online from we signed the land lease until commissioning in less than 8 months, and this is how we want to work. We want to deploy and invest in small-scale geothermal heat power plants where you can deploy the power as fast as possible.
Thank you, Alex. That's very fantastic to hear that. Jamie Baird, you're replacing today Emily Reichert of the Greenhouse Towns. I think you will be the one who is taking over Emily's pitch on that. But briefly introduce yourself and what it is that you do on behalf of creating that energy for geothermal.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Merritt. I'm Jamie Beard. I am the executive director of a program at UT Austin called GEO. And GEO stands for the Geothermal Entrepreneurship Organization. So we're founded on the basis that there are all kinds of innovations and a lot of entrepreneurial energy right now in the oil patch that can be immediately and straightforwardly leveraged toward the geothermal problem set. And so that's really what my focus is professionally, is finding those folks, incubating them, helping them get started and off the ground, and connecting them with the right strategic partners in the oil and gas industry to make things happen quickly. Now, I really appreciate Merritt's comment that you should not ever waste a crisis, and I completely agree with that. I would say that we need to grab on to the opportunity that that not only the oil price crash created, but also COVID on top of that, which is a wave of unemployment in the oil and gas industry. There are hundreds and thousands of people right now with the absolutely perfect skill sets to join the geothermal army, right? And it's just a matter of grabbing those people, finding the ones who are crazy enough to want to be founders, helping them build teams and connecting them with the right networks to start solving these problems. And there's a lot of funding out there looking for great, ideas. So, this is all about, this is a puzzle that we just need to quickly put together, right? Right people to the right funding, to the right support, to the right networks. And so that's what I am focused on daily. And I will, to the best of my ability, fill in for Emily and talk about incubation and what resources are available for startups. Companies that are just getting started and off the ground.
Excellent. Thank you so much for Jamie, and also for stepping in last minute. That is very much appreciated to have full panel. My next panelist I would like to introduce is Christian Gister. I'm very pleased that you were able to make today's slot to speak on behalf of the Inter-American Development Bank. Without banks, no geothermal. So please, Christian, please show the audience what it is that you do.
Thank you, Merit. Well, basically, we are a development bank and provide financing in the form of grants, loans, contingent recovery grants to Latin America, and particularly the governments and the private sector of Latin America. So we have been directly or indirectly responsible of a large installed capacity that we have developed in Latin America. As we speak, we have developed a financing program in Mexico. We have funded the Berlin program in El Salvador since 1994. We are working with Honduras. We have funding the Cosiguina startups in projects in Nicaragua. We have funded Miravalles and Borinquen in Costa Rica, working in Colombia. We funded the first geothermal plant in South America, which is Cerro Pabellón in Chile a couple of years ago. So we know one thing or two of how to fund some plants and how to fund these kind of plants in territories that they are not really wealthy. So that's another important point. We also know how to combine climate funds with sovereign funds from governments, and also how to leverage private sector funding. So we can illustrate with a couple of examples of how we did it. We also are working in the Eastern Caribbean in very small plants, less than 10 megawatts, in islands like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and now in Dominica. So, we have very large plants, like the ones in Mexico, and very small ones. And just to tap on what Jamie said about this army of geothermal, just 2 points there. We need to also link to the wave of decarbonization. That's the key word now. If you want to go and get funds from the climate funds, that's the word that opens many doors. And the other part that I think is important is that I think it was mentioned in yesterday's panel, that we need to stop talking to ourselves. We need to open this field to other fields, like, for example, now we are doing now to the petroleum sector, oil and gas. That's one of them, but we also need to work with the mining sector. We are working a lot with the mining sector all over Latin America. Where there are mines, usually there are faults, and where there are faults, there is heat. And the combination of heat and mining goes 1-to-1. And the other part, which is very important, is agribusiness. Heat for agriculture and climatization. All of that is part of the new wave of new businesses that we can fund. So it's not only geothermal, not only oil and gas. There are a lot of other segments that we can tap into.
Fantastic, thank you. And spot on, it's those end user sectors that I think geothermal can absolutely, truly help to decarbonize. I like that. I'll kind of quiz you on that a little bit longer later on in the show.
Sure.
Michael Campos, it is a pleasure to have someone from the venture capital world with us today. It is such a pleasure to have you. Prime Impact is your company that you work for. Please introduce yourself to the audience. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Campos, and I'm with Prime Impact Fund. It's really good to be here, and I appreciate the invitation. We're an early stage venture capital fund investing in climate breakthroughs, companies that, if successful, could be the pillars of a future low carbon economy. We've made 8 investments so far, spanning industrial microbiology to lithium extraction. Geothermal is one of the areas we care a lot about, have not made an investment in to date. The other perspective I'll bring to this conversation is from my previous role at ARPA-E in the US Department of Energy, where I put together some of the agency's first efforts in geothermal. So to frame the venture capital discussion and build off Bob's comments, between 2011 and 2016, VC into clean tech broadly was about $5 billion a year. This is like 5%-ish of the venture capital asset class. It's not a whole lot. Of that 5%, geothermal was another 0.4% of that investment, or starting to do the math, about $20 million a year. This is across all companies, across all stages. The Geothermal Technology Office's budget in the DOE completely dwarfs this. So the numbers are a little out of date, but the message holds true. This is not a well-funded category. But what I'm really excited about is transferring some of the knowledge, tools, and human capital from the oil and gas industry to geothermal. The sandbox, as I see it, is huge. There's a ton of different sets of physics, chemistry, geology, engineering, and so on that can be brought to bear on this challenge. I'll leave it there for now, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Lauren Boyd, Department of Energy, TTO, Program Manager for Ford Utah. You stepped in as well, replacing Sean Pors. I do appreciate that very much, Lauren. Late notice, and you are here. Please introduce yourself to the audience. Thank you.
Sure. Hi. Thanks so much, Merritt, and hello, everyone. We really appreciate you joining today, and I'm honored to be a last-minute addition to this esteemed panel. I am from the U.S. Department of Energy that Michael was just referring to, the Geothermal Technologies Office, which is part of the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Division within DOE. And it turns out that we're one of the largest funders of geothermal technology globally. And basically our mission is to reduce the risk and cost associated with development of geothermal. So that's the full spectrum of geothermal, from power production, electricity generation, to direct use and district heating applications. And so, as some of you may know, some may not, the federal government actually plays a really critical role across the board, not just in the energy efficiency and renewable space, in supporting research and development. And many of the things and technology breakthroughs that we use every day and are critical to our lives every day, and in innovation, are a result of federally funded R&D. So GPS, some work from the internet, as we already heard earlier, from Dr. Metcalf, genomics, the lithium-ion battery, all of these things have drawn on federal R&D in order to sort of move the needle and push innovation in different sectors. So our office takes that role very, very seriously, knowing that our industry is small and that we could have a significant impact on the deployment of geothermal within the United States and globally with the technologies that we fund. So in order to reduce the risk and the costs associated with geothermal development, we fund research and development. So we give money to the community, to academia, to industry, national laboratories, in order to resolve and address some challenges in all of those technology areas that I mentioned. We do that through what we call funding opportunity announcements, or prizes that you've heard Merritt mention, that I'd love to talk about a little bit later. And we're right now focused on 4 key areas: enhanced geothermal systems, which is what I work on, that's the program that I manage, hydrothermal resources, low temperature resources, and then data and modeling, which underpins all of the technology spaces that I just addressed. So what are the environmental impacts? What are the economic benefits, et cetera? What are the job impacts? of all of those technology areas. So we've been working to make an impact in the subsurface R&D space for quite a while. We've been around for a while. We actually funded some research early in the 70s to produce drill bit technologies that many of you may be familiar with, the polycrystalline diamond compact bit, the PDC bit, which was funded out of the Geothermal Technology Office, and now it accounts for about 90% of all oil and gas drilling footage that is drilled worldwide. So we're very, very proud of this, and then we're looking to continue to see collaboration with the oil and gas industry and to make to develop technologies with our partners in industry, academia, and our laboratories to drive towards increased deployment of geothermal through these technologies. And so just back to sort of the purpose of this panel, we focus on technical challenges, but there are many non-technical challenges that really do exist in the United States specifically and are in fact related to financing and are really do hold back deployment in the geothermal industry in the US. So accessing capital and actually getting power purchase agreements, permitting, these things can slow down the process of development in the US. And so anything that we can do to improve, reduce the exploration permitting timelines can help us increase deployment because we're allowing and accessing increased financing. Shorter timelines for development, more financing. And I think some of the other experts on the panel who actually do this on a daily basis from a venture perspective can talk more about that. But that's something that we're trying to assist with by looking to address some of these non-technical barriers, in addition to improving technologies such that we can do things faster and then allow our industry to pick up. So we have a lot of exciting technology-driven and non-technical barrier initiatives underway right now, focused on exploration, machine learning, zonal isolation, drilling, all things that have an amazing amount of crossover with the oil and gas industry. So I'm really excited to be here today to hear your ideas and to talk more about opportunities for engagement and for collaboration in the future. So I'll leave it there and pass it back to you, Merit. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you very much, Lauren. And this was already quite insightful because it touches upon all the questions I wanted to ask you to start with. So this is fantastic to see that through. I once said, and I posted this on LinkedIn, money makes the world go round. And then a lot of people replied saying yes, and the drill bit as well. And that's fair enough. Without money, no drilling. Without money, no finance close. Without money, we are all made redundant and sit on the side. So Lauren, I'm going to stay with you because you touched upon a few, let's say, fundamental issues that you're tackling, both technology-wise and the non-tech barriers that you want to tackle on behalf of that government perspective that you have. One of the big questions that I get a lot, and I would really like to tap your brain into this, is how can we really move that needle? How can we really make sure to unlock that capital investment that is needed, both from the government, from private equity, from the banks, but from your perspective, how can we move that needle and how can we make sure that we see that shift from oil and gas to geothermal?
Right. Well, so as you said in the opening, and just reiterated now, this opportunity is tremendous in terms of just the availability of such a skilled workforce and interest, thanks to this this meeting and this conference and some incredible influencers like Jamie and Bob who brought everyone together today, and all the other organizers, but also in the opportunity in the geothermal space. So I think that we published a document last year called the GeoVision, and this is basically a really influential for our office document that charts the course of geothermal development in the United States specifically, but I think there are a lot of messages that can be translated internationally as well. And so it underscores the potential for the geothermal industry right now, which makes the need to move that needle, to your question, that much more significant. So given technology improvements, our analysis that is represented in this GeoVision shows that we could potentially move towards, by 2050, a 26-fold increase in power generation from geothermal. So 60 gigawatts electric from geothermal, which is a big deal for considering what our current deployment is in the United States. So by 2050, potentially generating 8.5% of electricity generation is massive considering where we are. So there's a lot to be done in that time frame, and it seems like we're right on the precipice of something very exciting, as you mentioned in your opening, Merit, that we need people, we need skilled people, we need institutional knowledge and technology development in order to get us there. So focus on improving our ability to explore for geothermal, to reduce, as I mentioned, those timelines for actually how can we image the subsurface better so we don't have to drill costly wells, waste time and money on that process. Instead, have technologies that can give us a better sense of what actually exists in the subsurface, and then more accurately target our resources. This goes across the board in hydrothermal resources and conventional geothermal. If you're unfamiliar, this is where we have fluid, we have permeability, and we have heat in the subsurface. But also it crosses over into the EGS space, which is what I work on. We don't necessarily have fluid, we might not have permeability, but we have a lot of stranded heat. So if we can kind of get a sense for what's in the subsurface first before we start drilling $5-10 million wells, that's a major significant benefit. So a real focus in my mind on technology, exploration technologies is critical. In addition, I think that drilling is a massive cost, as all of you know who are involved in the oil and gas industry. But in the geothermal industry, we're producing water. We're not producing oil. We're not producing gas. So what we produce is of much lower value than what you're used to producing. So we really need to reduce the cost of drilling significantly. 30 to 50% of our project costs come from drilling. And so if we're able to drill faster, to drill more efficiently, we would be able to, in our minds, and at least in the analysis that we've done, improve the ability for financing and also improve our ability for deployment. And then finally, some of the non-technical barriers I mentioned. Our permitting timelines in the United States are quite slow. I would say that they are abysmally slow, on the order of 4+ years sometimes for permitting. And so what kind of venture company is going to be willing to wait around for a company to get an EA just to sort of drill an exploration well? I think that there's so much work that can be done. The folks at NREL and have done a massive amount of work on this to examine where we have opportunities to streamline this, and we have our regulatory agencies very excited and interested in collaborating, and have been for years. So there's a lot of promise and a lot of work being done already. The groundwork has been laid to sort of move in these spaces, thanks to the GeoVision and thanks to the work of some of our partners in these spaces. But I hope that answers your question, Merritt. Is that?
Yes, it's fantastic, and thank you very much for taking the time to really elaborate on that. I'll come back to you in a sec when we're talking about the prize, so hold that thought. Okay. But you made a very nice remark on venture capital. Are they waiting 4 years when the project is finally approved to go up into the funnel? So Michael, I'm turning to Michael Campos now for a question on exactly that, those venture capitalists out there. I think a lot of the questions that we've got prior to the session really revolves, how does it work? How do you get funded through venture capitals? So do you have any tips and tricks, and how would you like to see those people approaching you who have an interest in starting up geothermal?
Sure, so I'll say a couple general things. First is that to be a venture investment, there has to be a path to build a large company. So zooming out, venture is a high-risk asset class seeking large returns for investments that are successful. It's also really important to say that not every really good business is a venture business. So while I don't want to be overly prescriptive here in terms of what categories within geothermal could pique the interest of venture capitalists, our goal as a fund is gigaton greenhouse gas reductions. There's a lot of ways to achieve that, both in electricity and in heat, while building large businesses. But just generally, I think most venture capitalists are looking for ideas that break the mold and often bring some unusual perspective to a field. Not to use the overused word, but some field ripe for disruption. Let's see. So again, in our specific case, so we're early stage. Often the first check into a company raising its first round of equity financing. Often we're dealing with teams that are 2 or 3 founders, sometimes straight out of grad school, sometimes making a career transition. Team is really important to us. We're as much talent scouts as we are technology scouts. So as I think about what sorts of things that I would encourage founders to think about. One would be to the extent possible, retire or at least characterize what the risks are early on in company development. So I can think about what kind of unfair advantage that you could bring to bear on the challenge you're addressing. And then third, think carefully about beachhead markets. So, what's the first kind of slam dunk application of your technology that gets the business off the ground and launches it toward broader adoption? I think I'll leave it there.
Excellent, thank you. That's very insightful. And I think to stay in that investment theme, Bob, I'm going to move to you. And I think we've had this conversation over email a few times already, because you were quizzing indeed whether there is venture capital in geothermal. And I thought that was a pretty interesting remark that you made once. So what I would like to get from you, and I think the audience is very interested in that, is who do you think investors are when it comes to geothermal? Who is ultimately going to be investing in geothermal? Is that oil, gas folks? Is that converted high-tech investors? What's your opinion and your advice on that space?
Well, earlier I answered that question, although I've been reconsidering ever since. It's a combination of all the types you've listed. But let me get prescriptive, Michael. The rate of penetration is the key parameter these days. And Lauren has it right. Timing is everything, and investors have a thing called IRR. They have to get their return in a small amount of time, not 4 years is forever. So so there's a bunch of startups that are looking at non-rotary drilling technologies. I think that's a very promising area, since that's right at the heart of delay and expense. The funders that we deal with, you remember, they have 3 phases. These funders, they go out and they raise money for their funds. So they basically tell our story to their investors to make them look attractive to their limited partners. And then after they raise the money, they have to place the money, which means they have to do a lot of due diligence. And here's where it's in this phase where the distinction between an experienced operator and an experienced investor comes out. Being a good operator does not make you a good investor, and vice versa. So the teams during this due diligence placement phase has to carefully moderate those 2 influences. And then there's the 3rd phase, harvest. So you raise the money, you place it, and then you harvest it to return it to your investors. And that's the hardest of all. It's relatively easy to put the money out. It's much harder to get the money back. And so the people that you're talking to invest in you are going through those 3 phases. Let me close with one tip. If you're looking for investors, make a list of all the companies, all the startups out there that are even remotely like yours, and then one by one go to their websites. And on the website, there's usually a thing called board of directors. You click on that, and there's a list of their investors, the top 2 or 3 of their investors. And those are people who have a demonstrated ability to invest in companies like yours. And that's a great way to get a prospect list for fundraising. Thank you.
That's a fantastic tip. I bet everybody's now going online and look for those folks out there. Jamie, I'm going to turn to you, because from startup to incubator, that is a very important step. We need to incubate all these startup that are out there. What's your view on that, and maybe also have a light on the broader perspective of that in geothermal?
Yeah, sure. So over the past 6 months, every week I get 30, 40 emails from folks in Texas who are newly excited about geothermal. Some of them are currently in oil and gas jobs, but really want to make a transition. Others may have lost their jobs and are really excited about diving in. And typically their question is, what do I do? I mean, how do I've never started a company. What should I do? And the great thing is, there's a lot of things you can do, and there's thankfully an ecosystem, and it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. I'll bet you in any relatively large city, you've got an entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem in the form of startup incubators and co-working spaces. And that's where you start, right? So, and Emily's perspective for Greentown is a good one. So I'll kind of inject that as the first step. if you are interested, a new entrepreneur with an idea, and especially if you're leveraging knowledge from the oil and gas industry, and you know that it would be a breakthrough thing for geothermal, meaning it's going to help drill in harsher conditions, hotter environments, it's going to be faster, cheaper, better, safer, whatever it is, I would find your local incubator. If you go and Google your town and entrepreneurship, you're going to get a list of incubators, right? And co-working spaces and the entities in Texas that you look for, like in Austin, it would be Capital Factory. If you're in the University of Texas at Austin, it's Geo. Come to Geo, right? If you're in Houston, you have a brand new Greentown Labs, which is really cool because it's actually an incubator that was brought to Houston with the help of the oil and gas industry to solve new energy transition problems, right? So that's where you go because you can connect with a bunch of strategic partners there, right? Same thing for Boston. Boston's got a huge startup ecosystem, entrepreneurial ecosystem that you can plug into. If you go and hang out in these places, and of course, COVID screws with this a little bit, but many of these places have been very entrepreneurial themselves and have started having virtual hangouts like this, where you can go into your virtual office and meet with people and talk even virtually. So you can get started on these things now. And so I would say that's a first step. Go and start networking, find your incubator, find your people, find your tribe, and start building some strategic partners and bouncing ideas. And through that tribe, you'll connect with folks like potential investors and board members and even other team members, right? And it's a great place to get started. Often these places also have maker spaces, and I'll let Lauren talk about that later. But when it comes to prototyping, that's an excellent place to start too, is your local maker space, right? So you don't have to build this from scratch. You can, there are ecosystems waiting for you to drop in, and they will help you get started.
Yeah, and I think that refers to mentorship as well, isn't it? There is a lot of people out there who are also there to mentor the newcomers in that space. Am I right?
Well, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what the entities do. You walk in, they have these huge mentor networks. They'll plug you in with the right people. They have, in the case of Greentown in Houston, because it was a partnership with the oil and gas industry, there's the potential to link you up with folks in industry, right? So it's a beautiful way to start building your network in an already organized fashion.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Thank you, Jamie, also for stepping in for Emily. Bob, I saw your hand raised. I just wanted to be sure that we were moving in the right thing. Is it a short intervention that you wanted to make on Jamie's comments?
Very short, not to disagree with her at all.
No, okay.
But I'm reminded of Mark Zuckerberg, who started Facebook at Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And then he said, what's the best place for my little startup? And he moved to Palo Alto, and the rest is history. So taking that lesson, move to Houston.
Okay, got it, Bob. I'm on my way. All right. So I would really like to move to banks and the role of banks in this entire energy transition space. Christian, you mentioned decarbonization as the buzzword. I also think about that as the buzzword for this decade. We need to start decarbonizing now, basically. So I think a lot of people out there, especially in that geothermal, let's say, startup world, would be really interested to understand the role of a bank in these large infrastructural projects that lots of those power plants are. They need lots of infrastructure. How do you do that? How do you go about that? And could you give some advice to those people?
Sure, Merit. I think one of the first issues is that we work with countries that do not have a lot of financial resources. So we need to come in there and sort of pave the way for venture capitals, for other seed capitals, and and you name it. Because what happens if you don't have that? Probably what Laura said, the permits. If you think in the U.S. is low, imagine this in Latin America. Imagine to get a social licensing to do exploratory approach, or even further, if you get a environmental impact assessment for ESIA in an area where you have indigenous people, which most of them have, because these are in the skirts of volcanoes, and it's in protected areas. So you need to work yourself in very complicated situations. So there's where we come in, and we work with the environmental side to minimize potential risks for the communities, for the surrounding communities, or the communities that will be impacted by the projects. We also want to know that connectivity is there, so access to the sites. There's where we also can help. The other part is the regulatory framework. So who owns the subsoil? Who owns the resource? Who will be in charge of the concession? Who awards the concession? All of those things in many countries is not solved. So we come in and try to solve that. The other part is let's say, the economic part, to understand how a development of a geothermal in a country might make sense for a country. That means more than one plant. For example, in Colombia, there is a potential of over a gigawatt, and probably there is maybe 2 more, right? Now, the country has no experience whatsoever in geothermal. How do we even start there? So the way that we started is we designed with the government the regulatory framework of how to approach, so that if there is a private investor and wants to invest in Colombia, okay, what door to knock? What are let's say, the regulatory documents that they need in order to start the investment? The other part is helping in recognizing the resource. So if we can help in the geoscience at the beginning, providing grants for the governments to do the geoscience, and also to do, let's say, slim hole drilling, to recognize, the thermal gradients, so that we can minimize the larger drilling, right? The cost of the larger drilling of a productive well. Well, that makes a lot of sense. So when we approach the climate funds, we usually tell them, look, we need money to help the governments to do all the regulatory, environmental recognition of the resources. That's step 1. Step 2, when we have all that, the next step is to get money for contingent recovery grants. And what is that? Basically, we try to get the funding for drilling commercial wells. And what we tell the developers is that, look, we'll give you the money or the resource so that you go and drill your well. If your well is productive, then you will pay me back the cost of that well. If not, it will be a grant. So automatically, I can reduce big time the cost of drilling. And what Michael was saying about that 40% of the upfront cost in drilling, that's the place. Yeah. Now, the other part, which is very important, is the best examples of developments is those which were done in phases. Usually the first phase of a development of a geothermal program is the most complicated one, because you need to sink a lot of cost there. You need to do the camp where the workers will be, the access road, the part of the plant, and the transmission line. If you take the example of Cerro Pabellón in Chile, their first stage of that plant was the most expensive one. That was the one where we came in. And the next phases, 4, 3, 2, 4, 3, etc., they could enter and compete in the auctions of energy at prices that went from 2 cents a kilowatt hour to 4 cents a kilowatt hour in Chile, competing with solar and wind. And why is that possible? Because they sank all the costs at the beginning in that first phase. So these are little tips that can help. right?
Yeah.
But in either case, we need to pave the way so that developers and seed capital and venture capital can come in and do the rest of the work.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, and I think that paving the way is absolutely needed in the countries that are still emerging when it comes down to geothermal. So that those are very good tips to give. It's very interesting because Bob wants all of us to move to Houston, but I think the world is slightly bigger than Houston. So I'm very happy to have Alex, who can give this global outlook for geothermal with baseload capital, because I do think it's already nice to have discussed South America as well, but your journey, baseload capital, it is really exciting, and the latest news on Taiwan and Japan, obviously, it really opens up that door for that global portfolio building that I just follow with great awe. So Alex, tell me a little bit, how do you look at that geothermal ecosystem? What's out there?
Thank you, Mart. Well, I think that we, as we said when we started baseload, we take a different perspective looking at geothermal, not as a single project where you basically have all the risk and where you have a lot of the costs up front. And we're also focusing on low temperature and medium temperature geothermal. So by moving to countries like Iceland, Japan, Taiwan, the west coast of the US, you have very shallow resources. You have a lot of, old depleted oil and gas wells where you have a lot of information already about the geology. So you can minimize the risk looking at those projects, utilizing already existing information. So, from our journey, we started our first project on Iceland 2.5 years ago. So, we were still a very, very young company. But the interesting thing there was that, there's a lot of already existing wells on Iceland that are perfect for geothermal energy production. So first we used equity to build up the first power plant. We have then refinanced it with using project finance facilities, and we're also using the bond market as a way to finance both the exploration but also the build-up of our projects in Taiwan and in Japan. So looking from a funding perspective, I think it's been quite easy for us to attract the capital, both from equity players but also from the debt market, both the private and public. And I think the most important part is that we mitigate most of the risk by utilizing already existing resources, meaning that you don't have to, you usually have to drill a new well, but you already have the information about your geothermal system by already existing data on each and every site. And by bundling these projects together, then it becomes quite attractive for investors. Then, of course, we also choose markets where we have a big impact. So if you look at Japan and Taiwan, for example, after the Fukushima disaster back in 2011, both countries started to shut down their nuclear reactors and are now importing more than 95% of all the fuel used to produce electricity in the country. So we will also have a big effect on CO2 reduction. Now, we still have a long way to go, but I think that the interesting part is to see the interest both from equity investors, from bond markets, from banks, and from ECAs to be part of funding. So, if you're a technology company, then how will you go to market with your technology and get those returns and then attract the equity investor? I think that's a key thing to figure out. And then from a project development perspective, how can you minimize the risk in each project by utilizing already existing information? Because in a lot of these markets, there are a lot of available data on existing wells, on already done geothermal studies that you can utilize and then develop your project from there.
Excellent. Very insightful. Thanks, Alexander. Thank you. Bob, I saw you raised your hand. Would you like to comment?
Alexander and Christian have both made the following point, which is that there's different kinds of funding. It's not just geothermal funding. So there's the stage of investment, research, development, scaling, infrastructure, projects. Those are different kinds of funding. And then there are the kinds of geothermal, hydrothermal, EGS, etc. So in discussing funding, we need to be sure we know which of those stages and which of those types of geothermal we're talking about.
Yeah, and also probably how to get funding for that specific type of geothermal. I saw Christian raising his hand, and Alex, I saw your hand, but I go to Christian first. One sec, Alex, I'll come to you. Yes.
Sure. So one of the things, adding to what Bob was saying, is looking at who is your competitor. So in the case of Chile, for example, and in the case of Colombia and Mexico, coal-fired plants are a competitor, but nobody wants to fund coal-fired plants anymore, right? But they have a cheap price. They can enter at a very low price. So if you can really make the case, and here's where the decarbonization comes in, to the climate funds or other donors who want to get rid of high emissions, is okay, let's make swaps between, for example, a geothermal plant that can enter and that have the potential to produce green power and so on. And in exchange, we start closing up coal-fired plants. Many of the consortiums of companies are owning coal-fired plants, wind, solar, and even geothermal. So swapping between them is not a big issue. So it's something that we can promote. The other part is that oil and gas companies have abandoned wells, and some of them with a lot of heat under those wells. We can also make a pitch to these funds, as I mentioned before, that the decarbonization can start also at the fields of oil and gas plants to produce green power in their same fields. And that's something that has not been exploited too much.
I like very much what you say there, Christian, and I see Jamie is nodding her head as well, so I'm going to quiz Jamie in a sec. But first, Alex, you raised your hand. You wanted to intervene.
No, I was just want to touch upon what Bob said also, that it's important to identify what the funds will be used for, and there will be different money in different stages of the projects, and you can also choose the funding that is, the best applicable for your project or your company. Like, for example, for us, it's very important that when we start a project that we can commission and start the electricity production as soon as possible. Now, if I would then go through, a regular project finance facility, that would, normally take up between 1 to 3 years. But if I then use the private money, for example, or the bond market, that is much faster capital. It is more expensive, but if you're going to use it for 1 to 2 years, and then you can refinance with a cheaper funding alternative, then that's could be a good strategy for you. So it's just important as an entrepreneur, or when you're starting a company or becoming a project developer, to identify what funds is best for me in each specific situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jamie, I saw you nodding your head when Christian was referring to all that heat down there in those oil and gas space. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so that's a super hot topic. See what I did there? It's a hot topic in the oil patch right now, because it's a really interesting way for existing oil and gas companies to get their feet wet in geothermal. There's a really low barrier for entry for entities. It's a pretty easy sell for startups that have a really good idea about how to do it. And it's a very easy strategic partnership to set up. And you'll see actually in the next panel today, there's a couple of startups that are going to speak that are thinking about this and that are going to go for it. And I would say to anybody out there that has a good idea on how to reuse an oil and gas well, and there are some technological challenges. Well diameter is one of them, but there are others. But if you have a good idea on how to use an oil and gas well and turn it into a producing geothermal asset, a really interesting angle on that concept is the fact that you can avoid well decommissioning and abandonment by doing this. And that is a very, very, very cool deal for operators, right? And so that's a really excellent entry point for entrepreneurs out there that are thinking about this stuff.
Excellent. Michael, I saw you raise your hand. Yes, you can intervene. And then I'll ask a question from the audience because we have to move into the audience. And Lauren, yes, I see your hand as well. Michael, you can go
Thanks,
first.
Merritt.
And Kristen.
Yeah, so Jamie, I'm really glad you brought that up. So one reputation that VCs tend to have is that capital intensity and VCs are like oil and water; they just don't get along. In general, people are kind of looking for ways around this in geothermal, like how do you avoid paying to put the first hole in the ground? But honestly, most venture capitalists don't have tech expertise, much less in geothermal, and so not much tends to get done. So as far as ways to mitigate, we have about 3 million inactive oil and gas wells in the U.S. These are not just a negative externality, but could become assets, whether for pilot projects or actual geothermal plants. Becomes a huge question of geology, data, structural integrity, and access to the wells. I looked at this idea a bit while I was back at ARPA-E, and if you dig through YouTube, you can find me talking about teaching old wells new tricks. It's just one idea of ways to kind of gain a foothold as a geothermal startup, and I'm sure there are many others.
I'm interested to hear quickly, Lauren, your view, because you raised your hand. I bet you want to intervene on this topic of repurposing.
Sure. Super fast. I just wanted to point out that that there's a wealth of information that the Department of Energy has previously funded, actually from the standpoint of just from co-production. And so if anyone is interested, if you take a look at the many data resources that we have through what's called our Geothermal Data Repository or openei.org, there's some published literature on co-production where basically we're producing geothermal as a byproduct, using the fluid that's produced as a byproduct of oil and gas. We've successfully proven that that's possible at the Rocky Mountain oil field testing facility and a couple of other demonstration sites. It's a small amount of power, but 250 kilowatts could be useful for a site to actually run your on-power resource, on-site resources. But then to Michael's point, there's a lot of other exciting and innovative opportunities in the EGS space and other areas that we can envision for the use of oil and gas wells that are actually not producing and are shut in. So we're really interested in getting into that space within DOE as well. But I just want to point folks towards the resources that we have available on our data repository.
Excellent. Christian, I saw that you raised your hand as well. So we're moving to you. Quickly intervene. And then I have a question from the audience to you. So we'll stay on you.
Okay. Just before I forget, another trick that we use a lot, portfolio approach. So let's say we have all of us, each one wants to drill. And for that, we have to hire a drilling machine and a team for that. What if we hire maybe one drill and we rotate that drilling company and start doing a more portfolio approach? You can reduce cost big time. The cost of what we have seen, you have seen cost maybe between 6-8 million per well. We can reduce that cost even to 4 million, even a little less than that per well. So portfolio approach from that sense, and the portfolio approach that companies also are doing, I think in Nevada, that looking at minimizing failure, it's another way of reducing costs.
Excellent. I'll stay on you, Christian. So one of the questions from the audience, and I invite all of you to send in your questions if you haven't done so already, because it's now time to really open that floor and get your questions in. Christian, is closed loop geothermal being considered in the projects that you're looking into funding?
We are looking into one of those, especially when we have a situation where we have evident heat but low permeability, I mean pure rock, and we really need to have a positive result where EGS is not a final option. We have looked into loops that can actually do the trick, and particularly this is in the case of an island. In the case of St. Vincent, we are thinking about that as a potential option, because otherwise there are not really other alternatives. In the mainland, we can look for other sites, we can look for other techniques, but when you really know there is heat and there is really very low permeability, that is a way to minimize that risk. And in order to go to the funds again and tell them, look, I'll maximize the opportunities of the money that you give me in order to drill, and that I will make whatever is possible to use that drill well in order to produce something, the loop is an option.
Good. I think people are very pleased to hear that. Bob, this one is for you. This is, I think, that besides moving to Houston, we really want to pitch to Jeff Bezos. Okay, Amazon is putting money aside for clean energy, climate-related decarbonization. How can we pitch to those people, very influential, high level? How do we pitch from the geothermal community point of view for projects?
Well, everybody in the world wants to get to Jeff Bezos so that he can invest in their startup. So this is very hard to give advice on this. I would start by attending the conferences that he attends. And he attends conferences. I've run into him at a bunch of them. You should go to those conferences and see what he's seeing. And if you're lucky, you'll run into him. But I guess he must also have an official, I haven't called on him yet, but he must have an official investment office with a name and a website and everything. I would Google that up and then send my deck in.
Okay.
That's a hard question, you know.
I know. I thought I'd give it to you, Bob. I'm sure you handle it very nicely.
You know, if I had the money on me, I'd give it to you, but I don't.
No, that's fine. I have a general question, and one of you should be able to answer this. This is someone. It's Galian who wants to know what type of funding is available for R&D. So if you do a startup in R&D, so research and development, what type of funding is available in that space? Alex, thank you very much for raising your hand.
No, but it's different from country to country. But if you look in Europe, for example, then there's a lot of grants that are available for R&D, especially within the sustainability sector and when it comes to reducing greenhouse gases or technologies for that. So I would start by looking into what grants are available in your local markets, because that could get you a bit down the line where it would be easier to raise external capital.
Thank you. Lauren, you wanted to add something on that?
Yes, thank
Yep.
you. Yeah, I wanted to just jump in here because this is sort of the bread and butter of the Department of Energy. We have $100+ million to give to you, so please pay attention to what's on our website. We have, if you just Google Geothermal Technologies Office, Department of Energy, we have annual solicitations on a variety of topics in those areas I mentioned earlier: enhanced geothermal systems, hydrothermal resources, low temperature. We're looking into energy storage. And a variety of very specific technology-focused funding opportunities where you can apply and receive funding to develop your technologies, your methodologies. We fund actual tool development. We fund numerical modeling. We fund systems demonstration projects. So from the smallest components to the largest. And one thing, if you don't mind, Merritt, I'm going to plug our Geothermal Prize that we're doing right now that's really exciting and I think is a wonderful opportunity for those of you who might not be interested in all of the paperwork that might be involved in registering and applying to a geothermal or to a government solicitation. We're now investigating the opportunity to do things much quicker, and a prize offers that opportunity. And so right now we have about $4.5 million for manufacturing. And when I say manufacturing, what I mean is additive manufacturing. You've all heard of 3D printers. So using additive manufacturing to develop different components, different systems for subsurface deployment in geothermal. There's a massive amount of crossover, obviously, in the oil and gas sector and geothermal in this space, trying to understand how this new methodology for producing components or systems can help us produce things cheaper, produce new geometries that weren't possible with traditional manufacturing methods. And so we're really interested in any ideas that anyone has. You can check it out on the AmericanMadeChallenges.org website. And again, it's $4.5 million for any ideas that you might have for how to do things differently in the subsurface. So it's a really broad opportunity and an exciting one.
Excellent. Yes, no, very good, Lauren. I was about to say to you, can you tell us something about the prize? But here you go. No, well done, well done. I saw Bob raising his hand first, and then I go to Jamie. Bob.
Yes, so after you get your money from Lauren, you'll get two things there. You'll get the money, but you'll also get credibility because the DOE will have put the imprimatur on your deal. And then you should take that to the best source of investment capital, which is customers. So if you have a DOE contract that verifies the validity, roughly speaking, the validity of your research, you can then go to customers. In the case of the internet, it was the Department of Defense was the first big customer for packet switching for the internet. And the same could occur here. The military has bases all over the world that need to be independently powered. Someone should get the contract to build a geothermal plant in each one of those DODs. So look for customer money as an early financing tool.
Got it. Jamie.
Okay. So I want to put an extra emphasis with a bold and an underline under what Lauren just said. Geothermal entrepreneurs. There's more than $4 million in equity-free cash money that you can apply for right now and win in a month. So do it. Like this is one of those things that it is so easy. The barrier for entry for the geothermal prize competition is so low. Anybody can enter. You don't have to be a company. You can be an individual with an idea. You don't have to do a lot of paperwork. It's a 90-second video and a one-page summary. It's so easy. Enter. The competition has 4 stages. You win cash money through all the stages. You get plugged into networks. They help you. You get supported. You even get money for prototyping. This is a no-brainer. If you want to do a geothermal company, if you have a geothermal related idea, all you got to do, Google Geothermal Manufacturing Prize, enter the competition. Enter the competition. The first deadline is in a month. Enter the competition. Okay, thank you very much. That's my public service announcement.
Yeah, we're going to enter the competition, Jamie. Yes, I think that's a great idea. I think this is a very interesting question coming from Matt Adenberg, and I think it relates to the discussion we already had about repurposing oil and gas wells and tying it to the mindset and the development needs for geothermal. So one of the questions that he raised, or it's more like a philosophical observation, is that the end users for geothermal is very different than the end users of the oil patch. So how do we decouple that such that it makes sense to lean in on that existing, let's say, assets, but that we can serve different customers? This comes all about the business model, I understand. Who wants to shed his or her light on that fundamental question? How can we lean in on the oil patch, repurpose those wells, but find the customers? Thank you, Christian. And then Bob, okay.
We have been working with several national oil companies and also international companies who have pledged the net zero emissions for 2050. And you can see that there is a trend from being an oil and gas company to an energy company, and using all their know-how assets that goes in the direction of decarbonization, what we mentioned before. The pace probably is a bit slow, but it will pick up as we go, right? If you see the stimulus packages of what is happening in Europe, a lot of that stimulus packages is translated into subsidies or grants or low-cost funding in green endeavors, let's say, right? So It is relatively easy in the same, more or less in the same way that the DOE works. The DOEs from Europe and also in Latin America and the commercial development banks like ours tap into those funds. And you can see that there is a shift that's starting to happen. So the point is not that the oil and gas will keep doing what they're doing. They will change also. And if we find a way to make their shift easier, and that we show a way, either by using better their drilling machines that are not being used right now, or by producing renewable energy in their oil fields in the heat below what we mentioned before, or if we use the geothermal production to produce power in order to produce hydrogen, and then use that hydrogen in the existing installed capacity that many of these plants have, all of that contribute to decarbonization. So it's a package of alternatives that they have, and we can contribute big time. And as I said before, not only in oil and gas, also in mining and also in agribusiness.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Bob, you raised your hand very quickly, and then I have the last question because we are going to close out pretty soon.
In the startup ecosystems I hang out in, is generally a bad bet to bring a new technology to a new set of customers. You should choose one or the other. So
right.
To your question, find a bunch of oil and gas powered, coal, oil and gas powered power plants, and offer to substitute a geothermal plant instead, and then sell electricity the way they do. So the customer stays the same, the electricity customer.
Yeah. Lauren, you briefly raised your hand. Final comment on your side before the last question?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, just to sort of echo what Christian had said, that there's significant opportunity. We've been talking about, sort of big scale geothermal in a demonstration standpoint, and we've been talking about little components of tools, related to our prize. But there's a massive opportunity also for sort of hybridization, which I think that he pointed out, with using geothermal for hydrogen production, using geothermal to, to dry onions. They're doing this in Nevada. Using it to dry milk. They're doing this in New Zealand. Using it for lumber drying, for a variety of purposes, for aquaculture, for greenhouses. So keeping that in mind in your business models, I think that you don't have to just be a very specific technologist, engineer, or someone that's ready to go do a field scale demonstration on a closed loop. If you have an idea in industry and you want, the geothermal can offer you a lot of amazing opportunities for reducing your costs, making things cheaper, providing you with some other benefits that are very significant. So take a look at the Geothermal Technologies website. Look at our GeoVision. It goes. There's an entire chapter just on hybrid opportunities and where you can employ those.
Fantastic. A quick one. Lauren, can non-US people apply for your prize?
Unfortunately, no. I'm sorry that that's the case.
Lauren. Yeah. Okay. But thank you.
But I would say that one other opportunity there is, just to echo some of the European funding agencies that fund geothermal. We now have a joint funding opportunity with the U.S. and European funding agencies called Geothermica, and this is coming out on an annual basis. So there is opportunities to collaborate with European colleagues from that perspective there, at least.
That's fantastic. So, and also I just heard if we have a U.S. partner, well, I have many U.S. partners, so I think we can all apply.
That's
so, no, but it's great knowledge. It's great knowledge. Thank you. Alex, last question for you. This is really about, let's say, clean heat, and that's low enthalpy, entire energy enterprise that you seem to be very keen on pushing forward. Who are the financiers in the sector and how best to go about it? Can you share your light on that?
But it depends on the project that you're working on and how you're going to structure it. But for example, on Iceland, we used equity funds to build our first power plant. We then refinanced with a project finance facility. Now we're working together with the Swedish Energy Agency to fund a greenhouse project in combination with this one. So, there are so many different pockets of funding that you can use depending on where you are in your project. So I would say that you have to evaluate who is the best partner and in what time. And if it could be an equity partner, it could be a bank, it could be going to the bond market, it could be different pockets of funding, and it will also depend on how the system look like. So the greenhouse project on Iceland is a very interesting example on how we can extract almost everything from the primary energy that we get from the well, not re-injecting at 70 degrees, but utilizing it down to 30, 35 degrees centigrade. But in Japan, for example, there are a ton of already drilled wells, but no grid capacity. So there we're looking to cooperate with different companies locally in Japan, where we then would produce hydrogen instead. So we can build a power plant locally, and then instead of selling electricity to the grid, then we would sell it for a company that produces hydrogen. So, you know, different countries offers different opportunities based on the funding structures, the companies that are operating locally, and that you can tap into.
Fantastic. With that, I saw the raised hand, but with an eye on the time, we really need to close out. I'm very sorry, Christian, I saw your hand, but I want to thank all of you, Christian, Michael, Bob, Alexander, and Lauren and Jamie as well, for stepping in. I mean, this was amazing short notice, and you did a great job. I thank the audience for listening and taking the time to discuss and hear the theme of funding your geothermal venture. To be continued. This is such an important discussion, and I'm sure together we'll grow that energy space. Have a lovely day, have a great evening, and a good night to all of you. Thank you so much.